With only about 1 week remaining before the 2026 World Cup officially kicks off, anticipation is building across the globe. This tournament is being promoted as the biggest World Cup in history, and billions of fans are waiting for the moment when the first ball rolls onto the pitch at Azteca Stadium. On the surface, everything appears to be going according to plan. The stadiums are ready. Promotional campaigns continue to appear every day. National teams are putting the finishing touches on their final training sessions before the tournament begins. But over the past few days, a very different set of stories has started to emerge. One national team was stranded at an airport because its visas were not processed in time. Another team was forced to completely change its preparation plans because of health regulations. A friendly match was canceled at the last minute. And at the same time, the head coach of the host nation has become caught up in speculation about his next job after the World Cup. At first glance, these may seem like isolated incidents, the kind of issues that often appear before a major tournament. But what makes them noteworthy is that they are all happening at the same time, across multiple countries, and involving different parts of the organizational system. So the question is this: are these simply the final disruptions before kickoff? Or are we witnessing the first signs of a much larger problem taking shape behind the scenes of the 2026 World Cup? In this video, we will connect the events that unfolded over the past week and examine whether they are truly random incidents or something more significant. And the deeper we go into the story, the more complicated the picture may become than FIFA would like the world to see. The calm on the surface. If you only looked at the official announcements, it would be difficult to believe that anything unusual was happening. The 2026 World Cup is still moving forward. The schedule has not changed. The stadiums are completing their final preparations. Global sponsors continue to appear in every major promotional campaign, and FIFA continues to describe this as a historic World Cup. On paper, they have every reason to do so. No World Cup has ever been this large. More national teams, more matches, more host cities, and more revenue. That is why most fans are still eagerly waiting for what is expected to be one of the biggest football celebrations ever staged. But sometimes the most important problems never appear in official press releases. They show up in the small details. A delayed flight, an administrative process that is not completed on time, a friendly match that suddenly gets canceled, a debate that nobody expected to happen. Taken individually, none of these incidents seems especially serious. Many people would argue that they are simply the normal difficulties that come with organizing a tournament of this scale. The issue is that the number of these incidents appears to be growing, and they are no longer concentrated in one place. They are appearing in Africa. They are appearing in Europe. They are even appearing inside the national team of a host country. That is when the story begins to change. Because when signs of disruption emerge in multiple places at the same time, people stop looking at each incident as an isolated event. They begin to ask questions about the system behind them. And perhaps the clearest example from the past week came from the very team that will take part in the opening match of the World Cup. Here is the English voiceover version. The first front in this story began with something that sounds surprisingly simple. A visa. South Africa is set to take part in the opening match of the 2026 World Cup. This should have been one of the most important moments in the history of South African football. But instead of focusing entirely on football, the team found itself dealing with a very different problem. Several players and members of the coaching staff were unable to board their scheduled flight because their visa procedures had not been completed. The team became stranded at the airport. Football officials scrambled to find a solution. Government representatives were forced to step in. Eventually, the situation was resolved. But the lost time could not be recovered. And that is what makes the story so interesting. Modern football is often decided by the smallest details. One lost training day. One less day to adapt to local conditions. One less day for recovery and preparation. Especially when South Africa is preparing to compete at high altitude in Mexico. Every hour of preparation matters. At first glance, this may seem like nothing more than an administrative setback. Incidents like this have happened before. But what attracted attention was not the problem itself. It was who experienced it. This was not a group of tourists. This was not a small football club. This was a national team competing at the World Cup. A team supported by its football federation, supported by its government, working with a schedule that had been planned months in advance. And yet, it still encountered difficulties at one of the most basic stages of international travel: entry into the host region. That is when larger questions began to emerge. If a national team can be delayed by administrative procedures, what happens when hundreds of thousands of international supporters begin arriving in North America? A family traveling from Africa, a group of fans arriving from South America, a supporter applying for a visa for the first time. Will the process really be as smooth as the promotional campaigns suggest? Maybe the answer is yes. Maybe South Africa's situation was simply an exception. But while people were still debating that question, another national team found itself facing a challenge that was even more complicated. This time, it was not about visas. This time, it was about health regulations. And what happened next pushed the debate surrounding the 2026 World Cup in an entirely new direction. Here is the English voiceover version. If South Africa's situation raised questions about how effectively the system is operating, the next story opened the door to an entirely different debate. This time, the focus was on Congo. For many neutral football fans, this has been one of the most inspiring stories of the 2026 World Cup qualifiers. After decades of waiting, Congo has finally returned to the biggest stage in world football. This should have been a period filled with excitement and anticipation. Instead, much of the team's preparation has been overshadowed by concerns related to a disease outbreak. Because of an Ebola outbreak in one region of the country, the national team was required to comply with special health control measures before traveling to the United States. In theory, the objective was simple: protect public health. Few people would disagree with that goal. But the debate emerged from a different angle. Most of Congo's players do not play their football domestically. They compete for clubs across Europe. Many of them had been living in Europe for months before joining the national team camp. Yet the restrictions were still applied. Preparation plans had to be adjusted. Training locations had to be changed. A farewell match for supporters was canceled. Then another friendly match also failed to take place as originally planned. Individually, each decision had its own justification. But when all of those decisions are viewed together, the pressure begins to build. Because the World Cup is not only about the matches themselves, it is also about preparation, about stability, about building confidence before the tournament begins. Every unexpected disruption makes that process more difficult, especially for teams that do not possess the financial resources and organizational power of football's traditional giants. And that is where another question begins to emerge. Are these regulations being applied equally to every national team? Or are some teams facing greater obstacles than others? We do not have a definitive answer. But the fact that the question is being asked at all reveals just how sensitive the current situation has become. Because with only days remaining before the World Cup begins, what every team needs most is stability. What Congo experienced instead was uncertainty. And if South Africa's situation raised doubts about entry procedures, while Congo's experience sparked debate about risk management, the next front may be even more significant. Because this time, the issue did not involve a visiting team. It involved the national team of the host country itself. Here is the English voiceover version. Up to this point, both stories we have discussed involved visiting teams. South Africa, Congo. But the third front emerged inside the team, facing the greatest expectations of the entire tournament. The United States, the host nation, and the centerpiece of the entire 2026 World Cup. When FIFA decided to expand the World Cup to 48 teams, the United States was viewed as the most important element of that vision. Bigger stadiums, bigger revenues, larger crowds, greater commercial influence. But only days before kickoff, attention suddenly shifted toward a very different question. Is Mauricio Pochettino truly focused on this World Cup? Reports from Europe suggested that AC Milan was searching for a new head coach. And unexpectedly, Pochettino's name appeared among the leading candidates. Soon afterward, rumors of potential discussions and contacts began circulating. Pochettino did not confirm any specific agreement. But neither did he completely dismiss the possibility that his representatives were speaking with other clubs. At first glance, there is nothing unusual about that. Professional coaches are constantly presented with new career opportunities. That is simply part of modern football. What caught people's attention was the timing, because this was not happening in the middle of a club season. It was not happening after the World Cup. It was happening immediately before the World Cup, the biggest tournament ever hosted by the United States, and the very tournament many hope will transform the status of American soccer on the global stage. That creates a rather unusual perception. On one side, FIFA is trying to convince the world that the 2026 World Cup will be a historic turning point. On the other, discussions are already taking place about the future of the man responsible for leading the host nation. Perhaps none of this will matter once the matches begin. Perhaps the United States will perform brilliantly. Perhaps Pochettino will do an outstanding job. But in major tournaments, perception can sometimes be just as important as reality, and that perception is beginning to shift. Because when fans see debates about visas, debates about health regulations, and now debates about the stability of the host nation's own team, they begin to wonder whether all of these stories are somehow connected, and that is where the larger picture starts to emerge. Viewed separately, each story may look like nothing more than an isolated incident. But when they all happen at the same time, the feeling of a broader crisis begins to take shape. Here is the English voiceover version. And that is when all of the stories begin to connect. South Africa encountered visa problems. Congo faced challenges related to health regulations. The United States found itself dealing with questions surrounding the future of its head coach. 3 different stories, 3 different countries, yet all of them emerged only days before the World Cup. That is what makes them so noteworthy, because this should be the most stable period of the entire preparation process. National teams should be focused on tactics. Fans should be focused on football. Instead, the conversation has increasingly centered on issues away from the pitch. Visas, health regulations, logistics, management, and the question itself has started to change. Are these really just isolated incidents? Or is the unprecedented scale of the 2026 World Cup creating unprecedented pressure? After all, this is the largest World Cup ever organized. More teams, more matches, more host cities, and inevitably, more opportunities for problems to emerge. Any one of these incidents alone may not be enough to create a crisis. But when disruptions begin appearing one after another in different places, the perception starts to shift. People stop focusing on individual problems. They begin examining the system as a whole. And perhaps that is FIFA's greatest challenge right now, because the matches have not even started yet. Yet signs of instability are already appearing. As the countdown to kickoff continues, the biggest question remains unanswered. Are these simply minor waves before the tournament begins? Or are they the first signs of a much larger crisis taking shape behind the scenes of the 2026 World Cup? Here is the English voiceover version. It is entirely possible that everything we have discussed will soon be forgotten. Perhaps South Africa will still have enough time to prepare properly for the opening match. Perhaps the controversy surrounding Congo will quickly fade once the tournament begins. Perhaps Mauricio Pochettino will still lead the United States to a successful World Cup. Perhaps the stadiums will be packed with supporters. Perhaps the 2026 World Cup will become the highest revenue tournament in FIFA history. And perhaps, just a few weeks from now, all of these debates will be remembered as nothing more than minor footnotes. But what makes this situation interesting is that these questions have emerged before the first ball has even been kicked, before the first goal has been scored, before a single team has been eliminated. That alone suggests that the pressure surrounding the 2026 World Cup may be far greater than what previous tournaments had to face. Because this is not simply another football competition. This is the largest World Cup ever organized. And the larger the event becomes, the easier it is for every flaw, every delay, and every weakness to become visible. Perhaps FIFA will ultimately prove that all of today's concerns were premature. Perhaps everything will run smoothly once the tournament gets underway. But history often shows that small cracks tend to appear long before people recognize the full extent of a problem. Here is the English voiceover version. In just a few days, the 2026 World Cup will officially begin. The debates about visas will soon give way to football matches. The arguments about organization and preparation will give way to the sound of the opening whistle, and billions of people around the world will turn their attention to the pitch. But before that happens, I want to hear your opinion. Do you believe that everything we have discussed is simply part of the normal challenges that come with organizing the biggest World Cup in history? Or do you think these are signs that FIFA is facing pressures far greater than anyone originally expected? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I am genuinely curious to know which side of this debate you stand on, and if you enjoy deep analysis of the 2026 World Cup, FIFA, and the stories unfolding behind the scenes, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss our upcoming videos. Because once the first ball starts rolling, many of these questions will begin to find answers. But perhaps the biggest question will still remain. Will the 2026 World Cup prove that today's concerns were raised too early? Or are the signs we are seeing right now only the beginning of a much larger story?